And welcome back. And now, especially welcome to our last class in this course. Also, a very short, I think, class. And now we'll be talking about something that's most people are used to, but not that much. We're all used to thinking of x rays, right? X rays is a technique for checking if I have broken bones, or x rays to see if my bones are okay. You usually use x-rays for bones and heart tissue on your body. But there's more things we can do with radiation and images. Right? One thing that's very much used is industrial gammography. Which is gammography? Gammography is just radiography, or it's but instead of using x-rays you use gamma rays. And why we do that? X-rays, they have a certain penetration in matter. They are good to see bones inside flesh, because flesh is has low density. Flesh is mainly composed of light ions, right? Of light elements. Bones are calcium, a bit heavier, so you will see bones if you're in a framework of meat, right? But say you want to see, for instance, those steel pieces they put inside concrete, or you want to see the integrity of a concrete pillar, or you want to see if there are cracks on a large oil pipe or something, or any other pipe. You see, x-rays will not be able to cross all that metal, all that material, concrete, and you will see no image. Then we go to gamma rays. Gamma rays have higher energy, and as they have higher energy, this is more penetrant. And then if you put it, for instance, in this example, you put inside some kind of pipe, and you can see cracks, right? Even before they are leaking. And that's important because you say, okay, we have to change this before it fails. It's very much used also, but very much really indeed, in oil industry, because brute oil, essentially, petrol brute oil, it has the tendency to make to crust the pipes from the inside, and this crust starts to, these deposits after a while they start to strangulate, and you start to lose a lot of the ability of your pipe to have oil flowing through it. Oil is thick, and then you start to have problems. So they have periodic maintenance, always scheduled. But if you want to know if everything is going as planned, because maybe you're working with an oil that's slightly different than the one you had before, or temperatures are too low or too high or something, this could affect the whole process. So what they do, they insert, there's two things they can do. Either they insert, as it's here, or you do a real gammography, a tomography. Just put a gamma ray source here, a detector here, and you twist it, and then you see if how bad is the crust, because the crust has very high Z, right? The heavy parts of the oil tend to deposit. So essentially, and as a curiosity, this crust is also radioactive, because essentially uranium and thorium will be on the crust, right? That's why they have a very high atomic number, and they can be seen in these pictures. And they also always, when you clean the pipe, you have to treat that as radioactive residue, right? So okay, it's very much used. Gammography is used almost everywhere. It's used, for instance, and this is something that's daily used. You can see, and you may have heard, if you see the news from time to time, there's some issue with a car that was carrying some strong radioactive source. Usually it's a gammography source. It's used, for instance, in airplanes. If you want to check the integrity of the structure of the airplane without dismantling it, or with very little dismantling, you know the critical points. right? Where there's welds that are essential, where there's structures that are subjected to more stress, and then you do just a quick stop, and this can be done in a few hours. Just stop the plane and then know the places to check, to see, do some radiographies, right? The gammographies, images, and say, okay, it's all good. Or you may find, okay, we have to dismantle it because there seems to be a potential issue here. And in airplanes, you don't think of issues, because if you had an issue, the airplane would have already crashed probably. So no, you say we have an image that is not conclusive, or we have a potential issue here. Then you have to stop the plane, and then it's a few days, maybe a week or something, because you have to dismantle the whole structure and do a visual check and other checks, maybe a new gammography now that you're seeing what you're doing, right? But this is something airplanes do. I don't know. I've heard some, and this is just a wild guess. I've heard someone talk. Maybe it's every few months the plane has to stop and do that. It's just a few hours, very quick. And there's specific airports where they do that, because usually airports where space is not at a premium price, so they can have all this system set up there. Smaller airports, right? And well, I haven't put here, but other applications of gammography, for instance, they're very much used for bridges and all that, to check the integrity of the structure. Because if you have, usually when you have concrete, armed concrete as we call, you have concrete with iron, with steel inside. And if there is water infiltration somewhere, first you have cracks, second, the water that infiltrates start to oxidize the steel, and then you start to produce bubbles inside the concrete. So, and this could lead to catastrophic things, as you can imagine. So there's every bridge or something has its own schedule. Usually here in Brazil, I would say the urban ones, they don't have this much kind of concern, because they're quite short. They should, but they don't. And you're always seeing the structure, right? Because you have the bridge and you have avenues below, as you may have noticed. Then you can see the structure if something's going on. But on highways, especially highways that go through very unpopulated parts, you have to do some kind of structural analysis from time to time. I think it's once per year they do that. And then they do a gammography study just to check some of the, if there's some visual indication that something may not be okay, you do a gammography just to make sure, because you can see both the iron inside, right, the steel, because concrete is essentially silicon, right? So iron is much heavier than silicon, you can see. And the other thing, you can see bubbles also. So you can see bubbles, you say, okay, we should have oxidation here, we should have to dismantle this and maybe do some kind of corrective analysis, right? So yes, gammography is very much used. And there's another interesting thing. Now, this is not done essentially in an industrial way. It's just essentially done in research facilities. But there's something called neutron imaging, which is very, very interesting. Because when you see, when you take a look at something using X-rays, what you see are high density and high, what happens? High density and high atomic number chemical elements will stop the X-rays from reaching the plate, the other side, so you have black. And the low Z materials, so that's the right one here, right? All the metal body and frame of the detector, of the camera, blocks the X-rays, right? And you can't see much on this because hydrogen is absolutely transparent to X-rays, and plastic is transparent to X-rays. And then you do a neutron radiography of the same structure. And then all of a sudden, what will block what will really block the radiation now is hydrogen, not anymore all this metal. And then you see a completely different frame, right? So what do we use for? Not for looking at cameras, this is just a demonstration image. But we use here, and we used to do this service for, we have a facility like this here. We used to perform a service to the Brazilian Rocket Space Authority. Because when you want to separate stages in a rocket, you use explosives. And these explosives, they are an explosive that's inside a metal cladding and canister, right, thing. And if there are air bubbles here, this explosive may delay its explosion when you send the electrical pulse that should tell it to explode, or it may even not explode. And if you do that, you're in space. If one of these explosives, there are several all around the rocket, usually 4, 8, something, it delays or it doesn't explode, then instead of a clean separation of the two stages, you will have something that's just pushing you down on one side and the rest is gone. And then you will change the direction of your rocket. And rockets do not have a steering or a driver, right? There's no way to drive them once they're away. And so if this happens, the rocket will change direction and will not go as expected, and this could be catastrophic, right? So but then we are talking about explosives inside a metal canister. If we do X-rays, either the X-rays will not be able to, X-rays or gamma rays will not be able to cross the metal canister, or if they have energy enough to cross the metal canister, gunpowder will be absolute, or any explosive you have there will be absolutely transparent to them, so you cannot see anything. But then, if we use neutrons interact strongly with hydrogen, and explosives usually have a lot of hydrogen, and they will cross metal quite easily. So then if you do an irradiation with neutrons, you will see the gunpowder or the explosive, and then you can see if there are bubbles, if there are defects of some kind. And we used to do this kind of things for the Brazilian Space Agency while there was one. Nowadays they don't send rockets to space anymore in Brazil, so that's not. So another thing you can see is identify explosives inside sealed devices, because explosives are really hydrogen rich materials. So you can see sometimes you look at something and you won't see anything, and do an X-ray, you don't do anything. If you pass through a neutron beam, you will say, oh shit, there's something here. There is too much hydrogen here for it to be what they claim it is. We have done, for instance, here some experiments trying to locate glue inside restored historical pieces. You can, because glue is hydrogen rich usually also. We can, for instance, locate fossils. We have a poster here in the hall. If sometimes any of you want, we can show you this, and there's several images there. You can locate a fossil inside the rock, so that now you're pretty sure there's a fossil inside this rock, but you don't want to destroy the rock, because when you do that you may destroy your fossil. You can have an image, and there's cases in which you can even identify the species and everything just by this image. And moreover, you start to understand really how can you open up this rock without hurting the fossil that's inside, right? So things we can do with neutron imaging, right? And last but not least, but I left it for last, not because it's more or less important than anything, but because this is a use I don't think many people imagine, and it's something that always, because we think art, very rarely you will think art and nuclear physics in the same phrase. And interesting thing is, today, in modern days, if you have any serious museum or something that works with art, that stores art and analyzes art, they have, and it's sure they have some kind of connection to a nuclear physics lab. And I don't believe most of you would have thought of that, right? So, one simple thing they do is the irradiation of art and books, right? Museums and libraries, very ancient books, for instance, because when you do irradiation, you can sterilize, right? As we taught several classes ago, and this means decontamination. This means you can get rid of bugs and other kinds of microorganisms that may be living inside those books and maybe even damaging the books, mold and everything. So that's for decontamination, preservation and conservation. You also can determine the chemical composition of paintings, and this can be done point by point so that you can see exactly the composition of each separate paint the artist used. And this could be very important, first of all, for provenance and authenticity, right? Because you say, okay, these are the kinds of inks someone from that period of time that lived where he lived would have used. Because especially in the Middle Ages, painters would make their own paint, so they would use part of the earth from some place, herbs that grew around. So their chemical composition was quite a signature of the painter. And then when you get the chemical composition, you can say, okay, this seems something that this painter could have done, or no. And you can also find out, because throughout history, many art, especially paintings, maybe the most famous thing are the statues where they removed the penises of the men, right? Because old statues in Rome, you see, they don't have penises anymore. They used to. They were broken on purpose at some point because someone thought that was obscene to have. But some things are less explicit. At the same era, they painted out many nude scenes that were in paintings were addicted. They were retracted. You paint a blouse here, you paint a shorts there, and several other things that for some reason were not interesting for whoever was in charge at a certain point. And that's not interesting, because although it's interesting to understand that what this happened, sometimes you want to know what's the original paint, right? So you can combine sometimes X-rays with composition studies to determine which is what's original, what's not. And maybe using X-rays you can see if the original seems to be back there, and then because the chemical composition of paints is widely different from one to the other. So sometimes you start to change a bit the energy of your X-rays, and you can rather see deeper or less deep, and same goes for X-ray fluorescence. So you can say, okay, it seems things are down here, and then you do many images and you try to restore the painting to what it was originally, right? That's important for restoration and for dating too. Sometimes you have something that's not dated, and then you use, and maybe some of you have heard when we talk dating, it's not only for paintings. You may have heard of carbon-14 dating. Carbon-14 dating is something we do when we want to date organic material that is between 5,000 and 50,000 years old. The idea is that carbon-14 is one of those, and then we go back to things we said before, right? Carbon-14 is one of those radionuclides that are created in the atmosphere, right? So while you're alive, the carbon-14 inside your body is decaying. Never mind it's 5,000 years half-life, but some of it is decaying. But you're exchanging, the whole time you're exchanging carbon with the atmosphere by breathing, by eating, and then you're replenishing your carbon 14 tank, let's say, right? So essentially, while you're alive, you have the same carbon 14 proportion as any other thing on Earth. But then you die. It may be you, it may be a plant, it may be a tree, whatever. Once it's dead, it's no longer exchanging carbon with the atmosphere. It's not breathing, it's not eating. So now the carbon inside it is only decaying. And then when you get a sample from some kind of living organism that has been dead for several years, you will see it has less carbon 14 than what would be expected from a living being. And then from this difference you can know the age of your when was it, to be more clear, you can know when these organisms died, right? You cannot know if this organism lived for 50 years like a human being or for 1,000 years like some trees, but you can know how long has it been since it died. And that's the idea of carbon 14 dating, right? And there's other nuclides you can use to assess different materials in different eras, right? Most used one, carbon 14. And you can do radiography of art pieces to understand the existence of underlying sketches, because authors would usually they were usually poor in the Middle Ages, right? So they had to use one canvas for a sketch, and then he would look at the sketch and start painting the real painting on another canvas, and then he got this canvas, wouldn't throw away because there was a sketch, just passed some primer and painted something over there. And we can see sometimes doing an X-ray fluorescence on the opposite side, and you can see the sketches. This also helps you understand what the creative process of that given artist, right? So that's another thing you can, if you go somewhere and you have ceramics that are archaeological remains of something, you can look at the chemical composition of that ceramic and compare it to the soil in the neighborhood. And from time to time you can trace commercial routes. Even some of those are really long, because you can see that this ceramic you find here, the composition is not compatible with the soil in this region, but rather in that other region where there was some kind of other tribe or something, and you can establish commercial routes doing that, right? And one interesting example, for instance, this is a painting called The Wood Sawyers by Millet. And when they did some X-rays, they found a completely different painting underneath. All you can think is, okay, probably, you see it's in the back, right? You usually do X-rays on the back. And then you find, okay, probably he had painted it and didn't like it, or decided, okay, I need to paint something better than this from the same idea and something. As a curiosity, the Musée du Louvre, right, the Louvre Museum in Paris, has a full nuclear and X-ray lab. They have particle accelerator, they have an X-ray lab, everything to do analyze art pieces, right? It's called LRMF. You can find them on the internet. And so you see, when I told you that museums, they always had some kind of connection to nuclear physics, this even means operating their own heavy ion accelerator. Finally, two very interesting stories about this. There's this case of this painting by Rembrandt, The Old Man with the Bird, and it was thought to be not a true Rembrandt, but the man who owned it just leased it to the research group because he was sure it was not a true Rembrandt. It was probably some disciple of Rembrandt who had painted it, and they did several analysis, and they wanted paintings that were from the original Rembrandt, from the pupils, and some forgeries too, to see how they could use technology to distinguish between the three, because Rembrandt didn't have the habit of signing his paintings, and from time to time he would even sign. He didn't care for the signing, so he would sign his pupils' work. And the thing is, the guy lent it to the museum, and the guys did all these testings, and they decided, no, this is not a pupil, this is not a fake, this is a true Rembrandt. And then he had a painting that should be worth, I don't know, a pupil of Rembrandt. Maybe it was worth $10,000, $100,000. Then it is a true Rembrandt. Who knows how much it's worth? You would start thinking $10 million. So you see, and there's stories about this. Story is I took from here, and there's more curiosities here where they show several stuff about they found out about famous paintings that you discover a hidden history somewhat using nuclear physics. And finally, this is an interesting thing. It happened here in São Paulo. There was a story about the last emperor of Brazil, not the last one, the first emperor of Brazil, in fact, when Brazil was declared independence from Portugal. Dom Pedro I was the first imperator we had. Very short line. When he died, his son assumed, and when his son was taken out by Republic somewhere. But there were stories that you would hear here and there about how Dom Pedro I was a horrible husband to his two wives, Dona Leopoldina and Dona Amélia, and he would beat them and torture them. And it seems these stories are quite popular when you look at them. And so they did a lot of tomographies and X-ray fluorescence, and they found out that many of these stories were certainly not true, because there were histories that he would have beat Dona Leopoldina until to her death. Really, he would have caused her many fractures, and in fact, there's no sign of any fracture in her dead body now. But that's an interesting thing too. There's a very short story here. If you look at it, you can find more on the web and the original article, right? So I think that's all I had to say in this course. Of course, there's much more to say about all of these. This course was very, very narrow on most things, because that's the idea of the course, and that's because what we can do in such a short time. So if you are interested in going deeper in any of the things I've said here, you can come to me and we can find places where you find more about that and all that, right? Including applications. If some application seems interesting to you, we could go deeper in that, okay? But that's all for now. Hope you've enjoyed the course, and see you. Bye-bye.